Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and today I'm very, very excited and honored to be interviewing a very special space champion, Mike Kincaid. As Associate Administrator at NASA, Mike oversees strategic direction and leadership of NASA's Office of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics Engagement. Furthermore, Mike chairs NASA's STEM Engagement Council, which integrates, oversees, and assesses NASA's agency-wide STEM engagement functions and activities. Furthermore, Mike chairs NASA's STEM Engagement Council, which integrates, oversees, and assesses NASA's agency-wide STEM engagement functions and activities. Additionally, Mike is NASA's representative on the International Space Education Board and is a board member for SEDS USA. As you can see, Mike is truly a champion for inspiring the next generation to enter the aerospace sector, and I'm very excited to dive into his own personal journey entering the aerospace field. So welcome, Mike. Thank you so much for taking your time to do this interview today.
Oh, good. It's my pleasure. Thank you for asking. I really appreciate you doing what you do to help connect people with all the opportunities available to them.
Thank you. Yeah, when I learned about your role, I was really excited at the immense responsibility as well as leadership it requires to almost be responsible for how younger students are getting involved and engaged with the current aerospace field. So I'm very excited to start off by learning a little bit about your current role. So what
Mhm.
does day-to-day life look like as Associate Administrator of NASA and in your current role?
Well, thanks for asking the question. And I like what I've heard a number of astronauts say. NASA is one of the best team sports that exists. So no one person gets to be responsible for anything. I might have some accountability for some of the things we do in STEM, but lots of people across this agency are working together to take NASA missions and use it to inspire kids, whether it's middle school students helping them to see that they have a place in STEM, or whether it's a college student who's trying to figure out how can they contribute to our efforts, or someone who's in industry already trying to figure out how to be part of this larger aerospace, aeroscience community. It's a big, there's lots going on, and there's so many different ways for people to be involved.
And in your current, tenure with your current role, what are your main strategic goals in your position? What are some of the current initiatives that are ongoing, as well as ways that students can get engaged?
I love it. So let me kind of back up for just a second and tell you kind of my own story. So I've been with the agency 37 years. Actually, in August will be 37 years, and I never would have believed I'd be here this long, or that I'd be managing this role. But I actually started off as an engineer, and at a college as my freshman year, and at the end of my freshman year, college is like, I don't know that I want to study engineering. I'm going to switch to business because I thought business people dealt with people, and I wanted a job that dealt with people. And I tell students all the time, I didn't make a bad choice because I've liked my job. I've worked on in human resources, I've been in communication and education and um, legislative affairs, lots of different places. I d- I made a good choice for me professionally, but I made an ignorant choice. I made a choice without really understanding what the engineers do, or scientists do for that matter. And so back to your question, like what's our role? Our role is to really engage the whole agency into helping students make more informed choices than I made back all those years ago about what they can do. Because there's so many different ways. If you want to be an engineer, great. You want to be a scientist, awesome. If you want to be a business person, or a human resources person, or communication person, or policy person, doctors, nurses, laboratory technicians, all of these different roles are necessary in our community. So there's lots of things I'm excited about, and lots of different ways I think people are engaged at the agency to help students and educators and others see themselves as part of our community.
And I know that you were mentioning before our call started that there were certain specific programs at NASA that students could possibly get engaged with, all the way from elementary, middle school through university, being an intern at NASA. And I was surprised at some of the things that I noticed that NASA was conducting because I've been, engaging with the different STEM outreach initiatives, and yet there's just so much that NASA is doing that I feel that, a lot of students and young professionals and even adults and educators don't know about. Could you share some specific details about some of the current programs at NASA?
Absolutely, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about them, because it is, we are pretty excited about the things that we do. How about if I think it might be good for me to show you a couple of these, if that's okay. So let me share this, and so people watching at home can see this. The first thing I have to talk about is the internship program. I started off as an intern back in 1987. I know it was the dark ages, and it was an opportunity for me to get involved. And then all these years later, here I'm still involved, and we still bring students in. This year, we'll bring in around 2,200 interns. So there's
Yes.
lots of opportunities. And then there's another program within the Human Capital Organization called Pathways that we work closely with. If people go to intern.nasa.gov, they'll find all the different ways that we get involved. There are a limited number of international intern opportunities as well. When I say limited number, it's like I can count on this hand in the number of countries we work with. And there's a process that people can go find out how that would work at intern.nasa.gov. I do want to tell people that this summer we had over 28,000 applicants for our 1,300 intern positions. So it is a very competitive process. We did recently win for 30 years in a row. Organization ranks prestigiousness. I can't say that word, but how prestigious is your internship program? And NASA has been the lead in the level of prestige for an internship the last 3 years. So we're really proud of our internship. It's a really great opportunity for students to come and get some experience. So it's one of the things I'm very passionate about. But you mentioned what else can people get involved with? So let me hit just a couple of highlights. I do want to talk about. Let's see if I switch slides. I do, we can't get there on our own. We have to work with other people, whether we work with our mission directors, whether it's people involved in Artemis and in sending the first woman, the first person of color, and the next man to visit the moon, whether it's the James Webb Telescope and us learning to unlock just what's happening in our solar system and beyond, whether it's what we're doing on Mars and sending pathway rovers to Mars, or even in aeronautics, things we're doing to help learn about the sound barriers and sonic booms and how we work with the airline industry. There's so many different ways people can get involved. But at the end of the day, it's not just NASA. We have to partner with other entities to be able to talk about this and to be able to for people to see themselves in this work. And so, just a couple of partnership opportunities. I'm not going to read through all of these because people can follow this along at home, but there's a couple I want to highlight. One is this work with Discovery Education. They have a nonprofit arm of Discovery where they help students be able to learn about what's going on in science and STEM, and they have been awesome to work with to help us reach students. And then one that I probably talk about all the time is a partnership with Microsoft. They actually came down to a program we had where we brought in different partners to the Kennedy Space Center in the spring of 22, and we were talking about, hey, how maybe spring of 21, and we had this conversation with them about how do we engage kids. And they came back and said, what if we added an Artemis Worlds inside of Minecraft? And so the folks at Microsoft, they spent all this time and energy creating an Artemis Worlds portion of Minecraft, and they worked with NASA engineers and scientists to put together a realistic preview of what students would happen. So if you're using Microsoft Learn, I believe, and you're in a classroom and you have access to Minecraft, you're going to walk through a control center. You're going to talk to other Minecraft figures who are going to tell you about what it's like to visit and to be at the Kennedy Space Center and to be at the Johnson Space Center. And what's so cool about that is they're hoping for 1 million downloads in the first month, and they had over 1 million downloads in the first week. It was one of their most popular offerings that they have had. And so to me, that's what makes me excited is when we can take NASA content and we can come to partners like Discovery Education, the Department of Education, Minecraft, and Microsoft, or you can see down there Our Code and Noggin and all these different entities that we work with. That's where it really is powerful, right? Because it isn't just what Mike Kincaid is doing. It isn't just what the people here in my office are doing. It's really what the agency can do with lots of different people to tell the story. It's exciting. Did you want me to keep going through these, or did you have other questions? Like I want to make sure I'm not going on too long.
Yes, I did actually have another question that stemmed from this that we could jump to. I think one of the things that really popped out to me that you mentioned was all these intersections and partnerships, which is so important because a lot of times when you're interested in space, you tend to go into the space field and you're like, oh, I'm interested in the specific degree I want to pursue. But
Yeah.
approaching spreading space through these different verticals, through Minecraft, through coding, and other platforms where kids may not necessarily be thinking of a space career, but can find themselves excited by this type of work and find themselves to enter the aerospace sector is, I think, very creative way of approaching diverse students from really across the globe. And so this is very exciting. And one of the things that I think, as for me, when I founded Ignited Thinkers, one of the goals was showing students that you can pursue any type of degree and still be a part of the aerospace field. You mentioned that you come from an engineering as well as a business background. And so for you entering the aerospace sector, I'm sure from a very interdisciplinary background, was not very popularly told to you that you could do. And so with these NASA internships, are they open to engineering students, or are there a wide plethora of options for different students from different backgrounds and degree options?
That's a great question, Gitika. And yes, there are lots of different ways people can get involved. I was a business major. We hire them in communications. We hire lots of different places. And so I definitely encourage people. And if I was someone interested in doing an internship, that here's the other secret advice. I guess not secret, but the advice I give if I'm asked is don't just look for a summer internship. Consider doing a fall and spring. And so, yeah, I told you 28,000 students will apply for the 1,300 jobs, but we'll probably hire 400, 500 interns this fall. And I can guarantee you we won't have 28,000 people applying. So and so not only do your odds improve of the number of applicants to selectees, but you come for 12, 14, or 16 weeks instead of 8 or 10. And you can get so much more done. You can learn so much more about our community when you show up here in the fall or spring. I had a chance to do 2 summers and a fall when I was an intern. And what an experience that was. And I think our interns would still tell you today that they get a chance to do some really cool and interesting things. Um, and yes, to your point, there are lots of different backgrounds. I think there's 1,500 now different roles that you can apply for. People can
Oh,
go in
wow.
online. You go online to intern.nasa.gov and you tell us which jobs you're interested in. So you can apply to up to 15 different roles based on what your interests are. You can pick the centers. You can pick which places you're willing to work. So we really do want students to have an opportunity to kind of direct what their interests are and where they'd like to work and how could they fit in. So great, really good question.
That's incredible. Yeah. And one of the other things that popped up in my mind before we get into a little bit about your journey is you mentioned you were in your role for 36 years, which is a lot of time. There's been a huge change in the aerospace sector for even 5, 10 years ago. And so I'm curious, how has your strategy in approaching students and educating students about the aerospace field changed in the past 36 years? And what has been the biggest obstacle to reaching those millions of students around the world? I mean, what has been the hard how have you evolved your goals as, associate administrator and with your role over the past 36 years? Because I know the space has changed, the industry has changed. And so I'm curious how your vision of empowering younger students in aerospace education has also changed in the past 36 years.
It's changed so much, and what a great question, Gitika. Really, that is a really insightful question, and it's not just one thing, right? It's several things when I think about that. My mind goes a couple of places. One is I used to be the STEM director, which basically at the Johnson Space Center from 2000 2006, I was in charge of the education activities that happened at Johnson Space Center from 2000 2006. And now I manage it for the whole agency, right? So I had a chance to see what it was like in that region. And just imagine back in 2000, 2006, we had educators who were going in vans around to different school systems. We would go in person to give training. The internet was just kicking off. We didn't have webinars. When I think about the horrible thing that COVID has done for our nation's classrooms and yet the opportunities it's also provided, we've moved online. We wouldn't be having this conversation. We wouldn't be having people tuning in and watching videos to the extent that they do now. And yet it can't only be videos, right? So the way we reach students is different. The way we provide professional development to educators has changed. The way we engage people, back to your question about internships, some of our interns, when we were in the midst of the pandemic, all of them were virtual. Now most of them have moved back to being an on-site experience at a NASA center, but some of them aren't. Some of them are still virtual. So there's opportunities. So how we reach people is just different. I think the other thing that's changed is when I was when I was a STEM director, we did it all on our own. Like we would go find the educators, we'd bring them to Johnson Space Center for an experience, we would train them and educate them on the particular things we did at JSC, Johnson Space Center. And now we're much less likely to do that. We want to partner with National Science Teaching Association or with the American Federation of Teachers. We want to work with Discovery Education. We want to work with Lego. We want to work with Hour of Code, people who are already talking to educators. And so instead of us trying to do it all on our own, we're trying to leverage the networks that exist already. So if the cool stuff you're doing with Ignited Thinkers, yeah, we would like people who are paid attention to Ignited Thinkers to find out how they can get involved in STEM and at NASA. So I think the way in which we engage people has changed pretty dramatically for a lot of reasons, for because of pandemic and because frankly we can. The opportunity to talk to students has changed so much. We used to have something back in 2000. We had something called the Digital Learning Network, where we would broadcasts, live teaching things where an educator in the floor of our mock-up facility would talk to student groups around the country. So on one hand, we were doing that back then, but not to the level we are now, where it's just amazingly changed.
Incredible. Yeah. And I think it's amazing to see how, of course, there were so many negative things with the pandemic, but also the accessibility aspect of connecting with folks who may not be near us in the vicinity has changed dramatically. I know for me, I entered like into social media through LinkedIn when I was in high school during COVID. And people were saying I entered at the right time because before that, like LinkedIn networking virtually wasn't really that big of a thing until COVID. And so I think it's wonderful what the way virtual networking and opportunities and collaboration has really opened up. And every time I speak with you, I always am amazed by what you've been able to already accomplish with your team, but your passion for space. And you mentioned how you initially went into college wanting to pursue an engineering degree, changed to business, but still worked at NASA and found your way to the space field. So I'm curious, were you always like excited about space growing
Yeah,
up and like
yeah.
you knew you wanted to be at NASA? Like what was your aha
No,
moment?
yeah,
Yeah.
my that's a great question. My mind goes two different places. So I can remember being a middle school student watching the very first shuttle land back in 1981. So I was in middle school to date myself, and I always had an interest in NASA. But when I switched to business, it never occurred to me I could work at NASA. So this was not something that I was thinking about. But I happened to go into our career placement office when I was a college sophomore, and they said, "Well, NASA's hiring." I'm like, "Well, that'd be pretty cool." And I thought, "Well, I'll go work there for 3 semesters because who wants to work for the government their whole life?" And I'm a business guy, that's. But when I came here, as you can tell, 36 years later, here I still am. I've had a great time. But the other story I would tell is my 15-year-old daughter. So I've got 3 kids. Uh, one's 25, one's 23, and the youngest is 15. And when she was a freshman, we started a homeschool rocketry club through an organization called AIA, American Industries Association. They have the organization where they have almost 1,000 teams across the country building rockets that have to be launched 800 feet in the air. It's a really cool program. NASA partners with them. It goes back to that partnership thing, right? Rather than us create our own rocketry program, let's have us take NASA content and put it into AIA's national rocketry thing. So anyway, I dragged my daughter to this. Drag is the operative word. She did it because she loves her father and she did it, but she was not terribly excited about it. At the end of it, she's like, "Please, could I be done?" But then this spring in February, she calls us and says, "Hey, my best friend invited me to a Civil Air Patrol thing, and I want to join Civil Air Patrol." And I'm like, "Really?" My son was in the Navy for a while, and my daughter was interested in any part of the military aspect, but she says, "Dad, I can fly." And I tell you that story again, is because parents, we think that we can predict our kids and we want to give them exposures to things. And so here I'm thinking rocketry is just so cool. And then instead she decides that flying is what she wants to do in Civil Air Patrol. And by the way, it's a great program. As I've dug into Civil Air Patrol, I wasn't really familiar with it. It's an amazing program. And I say that because for people who are watching this today, it may be that rocketry and airplanes are not your thing. Maybe you're interested in our robot competition. I just came from Lunabotics, which is at Kennedy Space Center, where students are building these mining robots that could someday go look at the regolith on the moon. Cool thing. Or maybe they want to go to Rover Challenge, where we build this rover that a man and a woman have to navigate around I guess, a half mile, three-quarters of a mile course, basically on a bicycle chain, where they have to navigate. Or they want to work on gloves and how the extravehicular activity, spacewalks, like what kinds of techniques and tools do we have? And what's cool about all that is that what you're interested in and what I'm interested in may be totally different, and that's totally fine. There are just so many opportunities to get involved. And I love that about NASA, and I love that we're partnering with others. I hope by now people have seen that, hey, there's a place for you. It might not be with NASA. I mean, your experience might be with us, but you might end up working for Blue Origin. You might be working for there's so many companies. You briefly mentioned the industry is changing so much. There are so many opportunities out there. NASA is just one of many. I think we have an important role to play, but it's not just us anymore, and that's
Yeah.
exciting.
It's very beautiful. And, as you were talking, I love to think of space as like its own little world. So, like every career, every vertical you can think of in the real world, you're going to need just in the space field, which is, it's amazing. And I've heard like a few, like I was going to a conference and someone was talking about space psychology. Someone was talking about, serving cool space drinks as you watch a rocket launch up. And so it was just really cool to like see how everyone was so creative, brought in their own unique intersections with space and their own passions, and how NASA honestly is at the forefront of inspiring these young students to really dream big and to think about the unimaginable and to make it a reality. So I think it's really incredible. And so, my last and final question for you, now that we were able to learn a little bit about your current work as well as your journey into the space, if you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, whether it be pursuing a career in the aerospace field or just navigating a career, a journey, really just any piece of advice, if you could just
Yeah.
think of your college self, what would your advice be?
Yeah. You know, step up. What I found is that when I was willing to kind of put myself out there a little bit, things often worked out. Like I worked in Houston. Most of my career has been at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. And 2001, 2002, I went and talked to my management at the time. So I'd really like to do a rotation to NASA headquarters. And that was really a crazy idea back then. You didn't do that, right? Nobody wanted to move to Washington, D.C. and work in NASA headquarters. But I did. I wanted to see the world from a different viewpoint. And I think for those students or employees, think about where else you could look at. What are your other vantage points? And I think I would go back and tell my younger self, don't give up on those opportunities. Go seek them out. They're there. Um, you may not get at them the first time, but don't give up. Keep trying. Keep talking to people. I think the other thing I would do is ask lots of questions. Learn about different things. Just be curious about things. And I found that's given me a lot of that's helped me do a lot of things in my career is to just try stuff or to ask, hey, have we ever thought about this? And sometimes my team will say, yeah, that's not going to work. And they're exactly right. It's a really dumb idea. And sometimes we go, that idea is not so good, but if we did this, that could be a pretty good idea. So, I think if people will put themselves out there a little bit, their idea may not exactly be the one that ends up being the one we implement, but it might start us down a path where we get to one that's even better that nobody's thinking about. And we're definitely in that kind of environment. The world is changing, space is changing, aerospace is changing, and people should. I think it's a great opportunity for people to be involved in this community.
Very inspiring. Yeah. And, one of the things a few months back, I was reading how the jobs that are existing today in the next 20, even 15 years, 10 years, maybe, there will be jobs we've never heard of before.
Yes.
And that just goes to show how this whole world is changing very quickly and very differently. And so honing in on what we love to do, honing in on those skills is more important than boxing ourselves into careers. Every time I go speak with students, I always tell them, try not to put yourself into those boxes. And as you mentioned, try to step out and ask those challenging questions. And yeah, it can maybe sound a little bit silly, but I think being more confident to take those risks and ask those questions is really important. I think we tend to put ourselves into boxes or think we don't know enough because we're young. And I think stepping out of that is really important in the world we're living in today, because even a young student could come up with the most brilliant innovation, and they have to really change the game in many fields. So yeah, I definitely agree with your advice, and I know I will take it to heart, and I'm sure every listener who is will as well. So thank you so much, Mike, for doing this interview and
Sure.
for sharing your expertise. It was really fun to be able to talk with you and learn a little bit about your journey as well into this field.
Hey, do I have time for one more thing to show you?
Yes, of course.
So you're talking about people and seeing themselves in it. And if I could share a screen, I want to show you one other thing that I'm really proud of that we've started recently.
Mhm.
Started this last year. We call it NASA's Surprisingly STEM Career Series. People think about NASA, they think about astronauts and flight controllers and scientists. But to your point, you said it a few minutes ago, there are so many different jobs, right? We're trying to help students be able to see, hey, there's jobs for you. And what could that look like? And so we have, I think there's now 15 different episodes. They're each about 5 minutes long. We pick different parts of the agency to kind of focus in on, and we go talk to an individual person. So rather than kind of a general statement about the agency, it's we hear from this person who is the space tire engineer and how did he or she get involved with it. The first 2 minutes is like, what's the job? And the last 2 or 3 minutes is how did they get there? Because I think to your point, it's not it's the journey, right? It's not just suddenly you wake up one day and you're 35 years old with all the experiences and you suddenly become a space fair engineer. It's a journey and it's decisions you have to make when you're in middle school, and maybe it's some some choices that you make when you're in community colleges or other places. So, yeah, I just love it. And then the last thing, while I'm up here, love to show people that there's resource for students and educators. Love for them to come check us out. There's so many different ways on NASA STEM, nasa.stem.gov or stem.nasa.gov. Eventually got there. Stem.nasa.gov, right, gov right there. And then there's something called NASA Express. Every Thursday we send out an email. About 62,000 people get this email every Thursday morning with all the different ways you can get involved with NASA. And of course, you can follow us on your favorite social media. We would love for people to follow us, and we would love for them to share with their networks, because if you're watching this, you're probably a space geek. You probably love this stuff if you're watching this. And if you made it, especially if you made it all the way to this point in the interview, you must love NASA. But maybe some people around you don't know what NASA can do. And if you could share this information with them, if you could help us, that would be super awesome. So with that, thank you for letting me. You asked talk about careers, and it gave me a chance to talk about how people can get involved and how they can be part of the solution. Because it is an ultimate team sport. It isn't just the 18,000 people that work at NASA or the 50 or 60,000 contractors that are part of us. It's really every American has an opportunity to be part of this, and people around the global world are part of this as well.
Thank you for sharing that. I will definitely link everything down below as well. And
Thank
I
you.
think to your point, I think it's so important. Awareness is the first step to inspiring students, and so taking it out to the younger students and showing them what the possibilities are is what NASA and a lot of other organizations are doing. So thank you for sharing those resources. And
Thank you.
once again, thank you for this interview.
Super fun. Thank you for inviting me. So great to see you again, and I've enjoyed our conversations. Thanks, Gitika.